It's one thing to listen to doom and gloom about food and fertilizer shortages, skyrocketing prices, the cost of living, or your job being outsourced overseas or eliminated due to automation. It's quite another thing to hear practical, immediately actionable advice from experts who can help you reduce the fear, anxiety, and burden of these problems. Tune in now to the Surviving Hard Times podcast from the Finding Genius Foundation with Richard Jacobs. Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy of my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out, and I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on Current Initiatives. And now, to our guest. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Surviving Hard Times podcast, sponsored by the Finding Genius Foundation.
I have, her full name is Kathleen Tlush. She goes by Katie. She's the founder and CEO of Tlush Family Farm. They make gourmet mushrooms, microgreens, edible flowers, and they wholesale direct to chefs at least. They're on YouTube. You can find them, by putting that name in. And their website is tlushfamilyfarm.com. So, Katie, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background. How did you get into farming?
Ironically, I was a dental hygienist for 15 years and I had a very successful career, loved it. And in the beginning, when I first married my husband, John, I swore I had a brown thumb. And he kind of built this quick little garden for me. And I soon became very passionate about it. And, there's something to be said about, watering it, watching it grow, and then being able to put it out for dinner for my kids or my husband. And it's just the passion that has just grown and cultivated through the years. And now I'm a full-time mom, full-time farmer, and wow. I'm loving every minute of it.
That's really cool. How has it changed like your family dynamic and your day and your life and your relationship with your husband? I hope it's not too personal, but has it changed any of those things? And if so, how?
No, not well, some of them, I should say. So for anyone who's listening, we are in indoor agriculture. So I think something we said is that everything we do is indoors. It's always sunny and 70 here. It's 365 growth. We live in Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia, and there is 4 seasons here. So it's kind of fun to be able to grow something in the middle of a blizzard and eat it. And that said, the square footage of our farm is around 1,200 square feet. And the square footage of our living spaces, which is completely separate, is almost exact. So we've actually given up about half of our living spaces in order to facilitate this. Yes. So has that changed? A little. In terms of space, the dynamic between my husband and I love John. I'm obsessed with him. He's such a great guy. We grew up together. We used to walk to school together in 7th grade. We've been married now almost 13 years next month. And he's the COO here. I dream it, and he mechanically just develops it. And his brain, he's a fascinating guy. The things that he manages and helps me. And the partnership is, it's awesome. We're super in love, and we both love what we're doing. And so, working together, it just comes very naturally to us. And it's been wonderful. And, my kids, we have 2 toddlers, Oliver and Lady. They are 3 and 4 Irish twins. And they also love it. The things that they're learning, and they're out in the garden digging and scrubbing rocks, and then they come inside and ask if they can eat a flower and show their friends.
That's very cool. So can you recap what do you grow?
So we are a 3-part farm. We do gourmet mushrooms, edible flowers and microgreens. To sort of go in a little bit more detail of that, on the mushroom side of things, we've cultivated probably over 12 to 13 different species, but on the wholesale side, on a mass production, we sell 4 different color oyster mushrooms, which would be a brown, a yellow, a blue, and a white, and the king trumpet oyster mushrooms as well. But we have played around with, everything from maitake to lion's mane, and they all are amazing mushrooms. But in terms of space and size and production, that's sort of why we chose those. On the microgreen side, we have probably over 18 different varieties on the menu on that end. And then on the edible flower side, we have probably around 35 different varieties, but I actually just ordered like another 10 to 15 more. So we're always kind of expanding that.
Oh, well, as a public quick idea, I just interviewed Robert Bielman. He's like a professor emeritus, and he studied mushrooms and growing vegetables for a long time. And he has a protocol, I guess, where he hits the mushrooms with ultraviolet light. He pulses it. I don't know how he does it or how long or anything, but he's been able to get the mushrooms to grow certain compounds like ergothioneine and to change their color sometimes and to produce like vitamin D. And from what I gather in the interview, so it's interesting. Maybe something for you to look into in the future.
Mushrooms don't actually have much nutrient content unless you cook them. So in order to cook, once you cook them, you release all that. So he's probably found a way to potentially maybe bring all of those vitamins out without cooking them. So that's fascinating. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I haven't really talked to people about mushrooms much. I've talked a little bit about microgreens, a little bit about vegetables, which we'll get to, but mushrooms, I don't hear a lot of people growing them. Are they difficult? Like, what are some of the nuances involved in it?
They are. So I should say the type of mushroom you're growing matters a lot in terms of, we're constantly monitoring humidity, temperature, airflow, oxygen. So mushrooms, fun fact, they're actually more like humans than any other, we'll say, vegetable or flower that you can think of, in the sense that they breathe in oxygen and they release carbon dioxide. So they work just like us, that if they don't have enough oxygen, they will not thrive. And so they also don't like to compete with a lot of other bacteria. And so there's a pasteurization processes, there's sterilization processes, all of that stuff can be very quickly uprooted with the introduction of a combating bacteria. So a lot of it is sterile work and figuring all that out. My medical background really helps facilitate that practice. So it was perfect fit, actually.
Can you keep them near your plants, or do they have to be totally segregated?
They are. Well, so funny, the microgreens complement them based on the fact that they release oxygen. However, the mushrooms are separated because they are within a fruiting chamber. So a cultivated block can be out, as it's cultivating, I should say. It can be out in room temperature and be around as it's coming to fruition, if you would say. Once you need it to flush, you have to give it the perfect environment. And that would be dialed in temperatures, dialed in timing of humidity and circulation of air. So, they produce spores. So you have to extract that air. So you have a negative pressure in the fruiting chamber. I know this all sounds kind of crazy, but it's a lot to monitor. But no, they don't hurt the plants per se. It's not that. It's just getting them to flush 365. So this summer we've had degrees of 100, 95 to 100 degrees temperature. A mushroom would never grow in that kind of temperature. And so you have to make sure that you give it that sweet spot to get it to grow.
Well, are the spores hazardous for you to breathe in, or how do you have to treat the spores?
So the spores, every human day-to-day life, we do, and we ingest spores, but on that massive level, it can create actually something called spore lung, where it actually makes you feel like you're kind of sick, like you're getting a cold. And so we are very diligent about wearing the respirators that are involved when working within the tent for a long period of time. And then the negative pressure actually draws those spores outside of the tent that are in the air. It's filtered, it's cleaned, it's definitely something you have to work at.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So is mushrooms like a more advanced thing for people to grow on their own? Do you recommend that? I don't know, it doesn't sound like people should start with it, but I guess the Pareto maybe is what? Microgreens easiest, then vegetables, then what?
In terms of the way we grow it, our edible flowers are on a 7-wall aeroponic vertical system that's fully automated. So for me, they're pretty hands off outside of harvesting and making sure the nutrients are dialed in for the right parts per million. So they would be kind of hands off. If someone was trying to grow them outside, I mean, sure, if you have the proper season, a flower is just as easy as growing, a squash, right? Indoors where you kind of create trickiness. And then, microgreens, that's something you can grow on your windowsill very quickly as well. That's probably the next step up. They do require watering every day. So that is something you have to sort of commit to. And then, although we're trying to work on an automation for that as well. And then the mushrooms, that they are definitely difficult. I've seen people like do them out of like buckets and like trash bags. Of course, you can grow them on old logs if you have them on your property with like a spore plug. But again, it has to be the proper temperature. The spore plug may fail. It's definitely a finicky one for sure.
So if you don't mind, can you just recap the mushrooms? Like, what are the stages that they go through? What are they called? And what are just like the basics of what needs to be done? Just out of curiosity.
Absolutely. Okay, so phase one was like an agar plate. It's going to be the most condensed, organic, supreme cellular fungus. From there, you can extract it and put it to a liquid culture, which from there makes it a lot more pliable to place into the next stage would be in spawn, which we use rye berry grain. That spawn, once cultivated by the fungus from the liquid culture that you've put on it, will be put into a fruiting block. Our fruiting blocks are made of hard oak wood pellets and soy hulls and a combination of measured water. And then from there, the spawn cultivates that mixture. I mean, that mixture is different for each mushroom species, but they cultivate that entire block. And then from there, you open it and you put it in the fruiting chamber for flush.
Okay. And then
it's a lot of steps.
How long does that process, all those processes take? And then how long does it take to get the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms that you could clip off and do something with?
I mean, start to finish from agar all the way to the end is a couple of months, to be honest. And we have probably the more aggressive strains being in oysters species. But, like we've cultivated a shiitake block. A shiitake block takes 8 months to cultivate a fruiting block. And so it's really species dependent on how long this process can be. So, and again, it also depends on the environment. Things quickly can change or you get bacteria. You can't go back in time. So if some other competing bacteria infects that block, you can't get it back. It's done.
Okay. Well, tell me about the edible flowers. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, who eats them and when and how? Is it just on fancy desserts or meals, or how does that work?
So our edible flowers, as I said, we have, over 35 different varieties. They go on everything from desserts to entrees, charcuterie boards, catering companies, drinks. They're in cocktails. You can pedal pull them. There's a lot of different options. They're very elegant. They really, really bring up a dish. It's quite wild what our team or family of chefs, as I like to call them, have presented us with, what they've done. And as I said, from that little garden that my husband built umpteen years ago when dinosaurs were walking down the road to now, and that same reward that I got then is still that same reward on this like massive level, seeing these elite chefs playing with our product and then watching what they do with it. It's awesome. It's really the ticket, man.
So the edible flowers, like, how did you first get the idea and who buys them and uses them mostly?
So how did we get the idea? So we had early on prior to putting the company stamp on, had played around with hydroponic growing, which is, flood table spaces. And then we verticalized it with an aeroponic system with using PVC piping. And we had put that away when we started the microgreens and the mushrooms. And then I noticed just through some of my other fellows that they were, beginning the edible flower route. And I brought our knowledge back of the aeroponic vertical system and pretty much went to town and made it this massive unit that could sustain, a lot of chefs. And then, more again, on the microgreen side, it's the sustainability of it all, you have to be able to produce that every week. So, having the different wall setups, so they're, replanted and taken care of and swapped out as time goes by so that we can constantly provide these types of, species and stuff. But I mean, it was kind of like we took our old knowledge and revamped it. There's nothing more homesteader than upcycle, right?
Well, why hydroponics, not soil, even if it's indoors? And then why'd you go to aeroponics?
Great question. Very simply put, space. So, you hear the word farm and you often think of, acres of land. And in reference, we live about 17 miles or maybe about 25 minutes outside of Center City, Philadelphia. And so, the cost of land and the square footage of the home and property is pretty small. We live in just your regular average colonial. And so in order to maximize space, you need to go up instead of wide or out. So the verticalization of it allowed us to maximize the square footage that we are given without entering into a commercial lease.
Oh, but so aeroponics was even more dense than hydroponics, you say?
Yes, just because of space utilization. So a hydroponic flood table, there's these big blocks and they grow as if they would grow in the ground, right? And the flood comes up and then it goes down and the flood comes up and it goes down. Whereas the aeroponics that we do in verticalizing it, it's, sort of quintessentially think of like a plug. And then it runs fully automated on a drip system. And then the oxygen it gets in between the drip system accelerates the growth, from the best of my knowledge.
Yeah. When you first started, did you use soil at all, or you went straight to hydroponics? Why?
Straight hydroponics. Soil in time can, introduce issues. It has its own nutrients that it would be depleted by. So on a long-term basis, and can you imagine me going around watering like 3,500 different pots, and the space that would take. So the hydroponic system is in a rockable system and alleviates all the need for that soil composition. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some nicks to it. So for example, if, soil is very forgiving and a rock wool is not, it drains quite quickly. So you got to think about it. I once said it was like, it's like driving a race car. If someone gave me a race car, could I win the race? Maybe, but if I don't know how to drive the car, then I'm not much use, right? So I always make sure that, it's not just something you can forget about. I mean, it's got to be constantly watered and maintained, not constant in terms of like every second of the day, but you got to make sure that your systems are running correctly.
This is kind of just, again, an idea, but I did like a small grow tent. It was probably 6 years ago. And at the store, they had liquid like mycorrhizae that you add as a nutrient to the reservoir. I did flood and drain. And it seemed to help the plants like tremendously that I was growing, radishes, lettuce, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you have any products like that, like liquid mycelium that you can add? Or could you take some of the mushrooms, once they're at a certain stage where they're not kicking out millions of spores, and kind of grind them up and put them into the nutrient mix for the hydroponics or the aeroponics? Would that work?
Creative thought. I don't know if a dehydrated mushroom, and making maybe mushroom powder would be a supplemental. I suppose it could be. I would have to look more into that. But we do use a nutrient company that's very local to us, a very famous one, Jack's Nutrients. It's an Epsom salt they have their own lab. They're a really great company to work with. They've come out just to see the farm and check out what, cool stuff we were growing here. And that is supplements that we would use just in flowers.
Oh, so you do use like the mycorrhiza liquid nutrient for the flowers, or you don't?
It's a powder. It's a powder system. It's like an ABC powder system that you have to measure, weigh, and check parts per million. So it's like a couple step process, but you have to change out the entire reservoir biannually, just to make sure that the nutrient system is there, because obviously the plants absorb it and it goes away.
Okay. In terms of nutrients, is your aeroponic or hydroponic system really hungry for nutrients? Like, what do you have to put in, and how often do you refill it? How do you monitor?
Biweekly reservoir refill. And then we have ppm or parts per million, it's like a digital read on how it is. So you can see, you also learn how to read your plants, like any other farmer, you can see when a plant doesn't look healthy or when it needs something, and you read it that way. And so we monitor it both mathematically and visually. And that's really how you do it.
Okay. I mean, what if certain plants preferentially eat certain nutrients in the mixture, and then it becomes distorted or too heavy in one nutrient or another, or depleted in one nutrient or another? How do you know that?
So you typically would see the leaves turning purple-ish. You'd see the flowers having a little bit more of a pigmented speckles. I would say that, but they're pretty happy. It's a low acid. So we also monitor pH levels constantly. We have Blue Lab pH monitoring systems here, and you have to make sure that the pH level is not, because you don't want to burn them. So you keep it very, very low.
Oh, okay. So you just monitor basic things, pH, and maybe a couple other things, and you can see when they go out. Like I would think microgreens probably not. They would use the same kind of nutrients, but any vegetables that you grow and fruit, or produce the whole vegetable, maybe the needs of the plant would change, and therefore what's in the water.
The only nutrient system that we use is just for the aeroponics. We don't have any other supplements in the micro side or the mushroom side. And that's only because technically the nutrients are the food. In the microgreen side, the food is the soil. On the mushroom side, the food is the fruiting block, which is, as I said, the hardwood pellets in these soils.
Okay. And anything about the aeroponic system that, I don't know, is tricky or that you have to work on? You have to clean out the, I don't know how you spray the water onto the roots of the plants, but, do the nozzles get clogged, or like what do you have to watch out for in such a system?
Yeah. So we use reverse osmosis water here so that there's no calcium buildup in there. Cause that is definitely something you can be concerned about is, you get a clogged system, you get a backlog, or now it's spraying all over your place. So you got to make sure of that. The roots sometimes can get thick on some of them. And then you got to make sure that you have, I don't want to call it like a stick, but it's like a jabbing agent to just relieve the pressure so that air can be, sort of sucked in and then it doesn't overflow on that end. I mean, the nutrients, as I said, just do that biweekly and you just kind of check the ppm. What we've done, John and I have strived very, very hard to automate our farm as much as possible. If there's one thing you can't get back more of in the day, it's time. And as I said, having toddlers and being both farmer and mom, time is never on my side. So we've done our best to have pH automated, to have the drip systems automated, to have the reservoirs automated, all that kind of jazzy to gain back time to be a family.
Okay. So what, and then your customers are, do you guys eat what you produce, or it's mostly sold to different customers? And are they restaurants, or are they do you have a CSA, or how do you work?
No. So we are direct chef wholesale. So we are in private sector chefs, country clubs, restaurants, catering companies, bakeries, charcuterie companies have used us. So we're on the wholesale side direct to the chef. Do we enjoy our product? Yeah. Of course. I nothing better than a 5 o'clock cocktail with flour in it. It's beautiful. And then, I love mushrooms, and I love, introducing mushrooms to some of my friends who, they tell me they don't eat mushrooms. And I just say, you haven't had someone cook them right. And then you should change it for a mind. But 99% of our product is definitely sold and out the door.
Okay, so you wholesale the chefs, and they use it in the meals they prepare, the microgreens and the edible flowers and stuff, and the mushrooms too, right?
Correct.
That's really cool.
Thanks.
Economically, are any of them better than the others? Are they just all different, or how does that work out for you guys? Is your goal? What is your goal? Is it just to provide this local, healthy grown food, or are there other goals you have in mind?
I think the long-term goal would be to, if nothing at all, create maybe a legacy of some sort for maybe my kids in the future. I think there's definitely something to be said about locally sourced. And I definitely believe that the pandemic probably accelerated that idea and concept and value behind it with, broken export chains and just not having product available to you because it's coming from so far away. So on the edible flower side, for example, a lot of my people used to have to ship them overnight from California, and they would either come half wilted or half frozen, and it cost a fortune to ship. And so we were able to fill that void. Our product is going out pretty much 24, 48 hours after it's harvested. And there's value in that freshness. Whereas, some of my restaurants are used to some of these distributors, and the product has already been sitting on the shelf for a week, and then they got to try and make it last another week. And it's a struggle. It's there. And there's something also to be said about knowing your local farmer. Now you know exactly where your food came from. We do farm tours with our chefs when they want to come and see it. We're proud of what we're doing here. And you develop this relationship with them. I love my team of chefs. They're such great people, and what they do with the product. And it's been fun. Everyone's like, oh, you should hire someone to do your deliveries. And honestly, that's when I get to chat with my chefs and see the product as they're plating it, or maybe even have a conversation about, like every quarter, like, hey, the menu's changing. How about I suggest this? Or what about that? And it's fun. It's really fun. It's really fun.
That's really cool. I don't know. I know it's your own product, it's your own baby, but how much better does your stuff taste, or how is it different from, store-bought stuff?
I never like to compare our product to someone else's, just because I think that product has its own story. But I would like to say that the longevity of the product, because it's so fresh, is what makes us stand out. The conciergeness to it, where you are talking directly to the farmer, the grower, and working together. And I think that's what maybe separates us. I mean, you got to understand, I also live maybe 25, 30 minutes outside of Kennett Square, which is the mushroom capital of the world. So people originally think you're kind of crazy growing mushrooms, but there's room for everybody here. Everybody's got to eat. And, we're not for everyone. I guarantee like Chipotle is not going to buy my flowers for their tacos. But, that said, we developed these relationships. I mean, I haven't tapped into half of the restaurants in the Philadelphia area. No, that's my suburban area. So.
Oh, wow.
Yes. It's wild. There's a lot.
That's really cool. How long have you been doing this for?
Company stamp, we'll say October of 20, maybe November of 2020. And so now we are about to embark on our second year, and we're on our third expansion, actually. So G1 is, microcide. G2 is edible flowers. And although mushrooms were originally in G1, we are making a double fruiting chamber. So we'll have either we're going to have it super big up here in G3 and the build out that's going on there, or we're going to keep both, but it depends. We'll see how things kind of portray with that. It's currently under works and construction.
I guess a family joke would be, we don't have much room left in our house.
Touche! I've never heard that one. I'm going to use that for sure.
Are you going to go maybe into aquaponics too? Like have any fish for sale, or is that a whole nother literally kettle of fish?
That is a whole nother world that I am not going into. We've aggressively expanded in the last 2 years, and I kind of want to see how these all kind of work out. I hate to say never is never, but I currently at this time have zero interest in going into aquaponics. But fascinating system and how it works. So
yeah, very interesting. So for people that aren't near you and can't get your produce, but let's say they're worried about the upcoming potential food shortages, what can they do to just dip their toe in and get started? Should they go with microgreens? Should they try mushrooms or flowers? Like what's a good start for someone that doesn't have much time and is a newbie and is afraid to do much?
I would start with the micros. But mushrooms are very time consuming and complicated, and you need a lot of equipment with that to create sterile environments. So microgreens, just, a little bit of soil, got some seeds, water them, harvest them, and you let it rip. You can go with that. And, the flowers, if you're living in an area that can sustain it, temperature wise outside, you can grow it outside or even inside its soil, really. Just, make sure that you're using organic measures. You don't want to use toxins and chemicals like a Miracle Grow kind of stuff like that. I mean, because you're going to ingest it. So just be cautious of those things.
And one of the last questions, what are the major inputs that you need to run your operation? Like, I guess you have to buy seeds for microgreens, at various times. You have to have water. You have to buy nutrients. Like, what are the major inputs you need to your systems?
Water is one. Electricity, because we're using tons and tons of grow lights. So you got to have energy, so output of energy. And yep, you're going to need seeds for sure. That can add up for sure, especially on the microgreen side. On mushroom side, you can buy agars or liquid cultures from different companies, which, up front will cost you, but once you learn how to expand them, you can expand them further. Yeah. And I would say those are kind of the energy, water, seeds, and then, a few other kind of random stuff. And you get going. Just depends on what kind of scale you want.
I gotcha. Yeah. Have you tried to make your own seeds, or is that again a whole nother world that takes a whole different tack to make seeds for yourself?
Interesting enough, you should ask that question. Just today, one of my violas actually pumped out some seeds. And so we are going to probably keep the seeds and dry them out for use. However, on our level, the amount of time and volume I would need on seeds, it's definitely another realm that would save a lot of money, but just fiscally and space-wise, it's not possible on the volume that we do.
I gotcha. Well, in the future, if you build the Tlush mansion, and you have half of it for the farm, it could be a lot bigger, but not yet, right?
Not yet. Commercial leases are, they're scary. They're really, we have a family, we have 2 toddlers. As I said, this is my full-time job here. And so before I enter into a 3 to 5 year lease with, again, I have to make sure that the temperature and the humidity and the control in there. And you look at some of these commercial leases and the ceilings are 15 feet high. You gotta really make sure you're committed. I wanted to be sure that I maximized, we have this sort of funny saying here at our farm here that we are breaking the mold of what you think of a stereotypical farm by the square foot, because, we're not measured in acres, we're measured in square feet. And so before you increase that to, a large capacity, I wanted to play it safe. I'm not going to lie. Definitely want to play it safe. I think the pandemic kind of taught us all a lot to be a little more conservative.
It'll be funny is if you calculate in cubic centimeters the size of your farm and express it that way. Like we have a 3 billion cubic centimeter farm.
It would make us sound bougie, right? Bougier than we already are.
Yeah.
The metrics on our farm are fabulous. I mean, we're killing it in millimeters.
Well, very cool. What's the best way for people to find out more? On YouTube, is it just they should look for what Tlush Farms?
I would say we're most active on Instagram. Definitely some fun videos and antics over there. It's hard to keep up with all the socials. Our website, you can contact us directly through that. That's tlushfamilyfarm.com. And then our handle on Instagram is at Tlush Family Farm. Definitely great ways to reach us out there in DMs as well. See the fun videos, up to date. YouTube, we had to take a kind of a backseat on the YouTube channel just to focus on, expanding, but we do plan on getting back to that. So that'll be kind of a fun future vamp. But yeah, that would be the best way. Instagram or through our website.
Very good. Katie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and, being so open about what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me, and have a great day.
Before you stop listening, ask yourself, what are 1 or 2 useful things you heard on this podcast that can help you overcome food and fertilizer shortages, skyrocketing prices, the cost of living, or your job being outsourced overseas or eliminated due to automation? Please like and subscribe and tell your friends and family about their Surviving Hard Times podcast. We're all going to need help now and in the near future.